Hello, my name is Katie Mitchell, and I am a graduate student at the University of Nevada, Reno. And this video presentation is for Band 707, class on cybersecurity. And the question that is being posed in this presentation is, what is the most significant and divisive ethical and/or public policy debate in the field of cybersecurity right now? And in my opinion, that would be employee surveillance and monitoring. And the question at hand is, working and living under surveillance. Is it a policy, or are we doing policies over privacy? And what is that line that we are towing? All right, to get us started, the ethical issue that has been identified is the question, is monitoring employees an invasion of an employee's expectation of privacy? When I started this research into this debate, the Internet of Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a peer-reviewed academic resource, was a great place to start for me in order just to get a baseline of what are ethics around surveillance, and what are ethics and things to consider when an employer is deciding or making that decision if monitoring employees is the right step for them. So the ethics of surveillance considers the moral aspects of how surveillance is employed. It is a value-neutral activity which may be used for good or ill, or it is always problematic, and if so, why? What are the benefits and harms of surveillance? Who is entitled to carry it out, and when and under what circumstances? So those are a few questions that should be considered when the decision of putting together a plan and an implementation plan of such monitoring on employees. Also, a recognition that there is also a tension between the safety of the individual as granted by his or her privacy and the safety of the community, which comes from denying the individual his or her privacy. On the most basic level, I feel safest if you know nothing about me, but I know everything about you. However, the reverse from this perspective, leading to the tension of balancing privacy against security, the balance suggests that it may be morally justifiable to deny one's person's privacy in the interest of the security of the community, although it is by no means always clear when these institutions may arise. And I think that's a great point to point out, in that, there are boundaries as far as when it comes to monitoring, bumping up to somebody else's privacy in the sake of somebody else's security. So that this balance is something that absolutely should be considered when it's carried out, especially by an employer in wanting to monitor the employees. On this next slide, I thought it would be helpful to pull in some terms and some background information around monitoring and cyber monitoring and surveillance and employee cyber surveillance. So I found an interesting video on YouTube from business.com, and they were interviewing a lawyer who was familiar with the laws and the ethics around employee monitoring, and he made some poignant, interesting facts that I thought were important to bring into this conversation as a background information. He mentioned that there are no federal laws that prevent monitoring of employees, except there are some exceptions with government contracts and when it comes to unions and the National Relations Labor Act, in terms of there were some specifics called out for email and digital communications that make it difficult at a federal level, but for the most part, there's not much to be said around employee monitoring as well. So that then drops us down to there are then 50 states and 50 state laws to navigate as an employer. If this is something that you choose to bring in and think is worthy, then it's something that you also need to navigate as part of your implementation plan and take into consideration, because each state has their own definitions of invasion of privacy and the right to privacy. So also, if you can see on here, employee cyber surveillance is employee monitoring in a form of a workplace surveillance where employees collect data regarding their employees' computer usage, location, and productivity. Also, just this definition of cyber surveillance in general is an electronic system for surveillance on online activities, objects, processes that are operated from and on the internet. And the definition of cyber Monitoring is the process of continuously observing an IT system in order to detect data breaches, cyber threats, or other vulnerabilities. It is a proactive cybersecurity practice that can help your IT team sift through cyber events to determine which one may pose threats to you and your data systems. Something that I pulled together in order to kind of bring some background information as we talk about the next slides. A few ways to an employer can monitor an employee is through the software, computer software on the computer, through cameras and facial recognition. There's tracking systems that are put on their desktop, tracking their emails, their keystrokes, website use, tracking of monitoring. Some of it's getting more sophisticated as we go along. There was an article in the Washington Post that I posted this quote from, which is, the adoption of technology coincides with the increases in companies' use of more traditional monitoring software, which can track an employees' computer keystrokes, take screenshots, and in some cases record audio or video while they're working from home. Sometimes this is done without their knowledge, which means companies have the potential to gain access to the employees' private details like banking or health information. So this brings us to the cons on the next page and the flip side of this ethical issue of where it falls on the monitoring of employees. So Jotform is a company that actually does the monitoring software that's for employees, and they discuss in this video of reasons to monitor your employees. They say it would help manage workloads, it can ensure data security and integrity, managers use it to track time spent on tasks, it can improve processes if tasks are taking too long, it allows employers to track the employee's phone and communications. It gives enhanced security and cybersecurity for protection from hackers and attacks, so that, especially in these remote working locations. So when I think of monitoring and surveillance and the reasons why not to monitor, immediately what comes to my mind was the George Orwell's 1985 book. So I had to call that out definitely because of the policing, big brothers watching you kind of state. So with that regards, this slide is dedicated to reasons why not to monitor employees. An employer needs to not allow reasonable expectation of privacy to exist if they want to monitor employees. So that's an important concept right there, because if they want to monitor employees, they need to make sure that the steps that they take in the implementation process definitely makes it known that there is no reasonable expectation of privacy if you are an employee of this company, and you need to make that very well known. And we'll talk about that in this last slide. It already out the gate establishes distrust with an employee because you're watching them. So it's already saying we don't trust you. It may affect an employee job satisfaction knowing that they're being monitored at all times. So that can be a heavy load for them to have to know while they are performing tasks, and that's a filter that normally they may not have had prior. May subjectively judge an employee incorrectly with the facial recognitions or the different uses. If they start using it for sentiment, I think that can start getting into an ethical area. So an employer must figure out how to monitor, collect, and analyze the data, which is more work. It's another important point. It's all great and dandy if you want to start an employer wants to start monitoring their employees. However, there's also work in needing to analyze the data and etc. What are you going to do with it, and how are you going to carry it out? How are you going to enforce it, and what are you going to do? So it could also impact company culture. Absolutely. If there's low job satisfaction, if there's already distrust within the company, that can definitely be something that needs to be navigated strongly, so it doesn't go in the wrong direction. As well as you want to make sure that you toe that line with an employee, as an employer, with your employees. And so ethics are not the law. They are personal, so it's difficult and unadvisable to apply an ethics argument to monitoring employees. So to stick to the law and have a well-defined process for setting up the policy. And now I really thought that was important, and it's going to carry us to our next slide, which is, if this is something that you are going to implement into your company, you really want to make sure that you do it well, and you do it with a understanding of that there is a fine balance, and that you want to make sure that it's also monitored as far as the upkeep and the necessary maintenance to make sure that it's working and that it is continually changing and updating as it's a moving target to make sure that these things are performing for the outcomes in which you are desiring. My final thoughts are on employee monitoring software is that the consent is a major consideration in the justification of the surveillance and particularly the cause of surveillance. I thought that was an important quote to put up on this last slide because that is something as employers want to get into monitoring and using software for their employees, and this debate about the ethics around it, that consent needs to be part of the conversation right out the bat. If employees don't know that they're being, there's laws around that, but if they don't know that they're being monitored, or they don't know what to level, or even just, I guess, understanding to what level that they are being monitored, it's the employer's responsibility to put that out front and make sure that the consent is always driven. So in all of the readings and the research that I've been doing on this topic, these are what it basically sums up to, things that if you are moving forward with a monitoring plan, the company needs to communicate that to their employees at every possible way that they can think of, that they are using the employee software. Starting with a policy, having employees sign it, have them ask questions, train on the policy at least annually, if not more often. With every login, have the employee agree to the acknowledgement of the policy by clicking agree to establish that no expectation of privacy history is there, so that if something does come back up, then you can show that they have agreed multiple times that they agreed and knew that there was an expectation of privacy, and they knew that they were being monitored. And in closing, I left this one article that I just found that was just basically talking about the laws in which some of the states already have in place, and to make sure that if you are an employer looking into these types of solutions for your company, that definitely look into your state laws, because some states are actually getting quite granular. On top of, some states might actually have some requirements when it comes to this sort of implementation of monitoring software. Thank you so much for your time and your attention for this topic, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.